My name is Claire Mercer, and I was 35 when my parents stood at the head table of their own company anniversary dinner, raised a glass, and told 80 people that they had adopted me for money. My father did not say it in anger. He said it as if he were explaining a business decision. He had just asked me to sign a refinancing package for Mercer Office Supply, the company that had paid our bills, shaped our holidays, and taught everyone in my family to treat debt like a private inconvenience. When I said I needed time to read the papers, he smiled at the guests and said, "Claire has always been cautious. We took her in when the state assistance made it possible, and now she still acts like we owe her a vote." A few people laughed because they thought he was joking. My mother looked down at her plate. My brother, Gavin, stared at the napkin in his lap. I had spent most of my life hearing smaller versions of the same story, that I was lucky, that I had been rescued, that I should be grateful enough not to ask questions. But that night, my father placed the story in the middle of a room full of clients, relatives, and employees, then used it to make my refusal look selfish. They expected me to cry. They expected me to sign because silence had always made their version of the family easier to maintain. I did not. I folded the refinance agreement, placed it beside my untouched coffee, and told my father that I would not put my name on a debt I did not understand. Then a woman I had met only twice before stood up from a table near the back of the room. Her name was Elena Monroe. She was my birth aunt, and she had brought a folder so thin it looked harmless. Behind her, my birth grandmother and two cousins rose slowly from their chairs. Elena did not shout. She only said, "Richard, before you tell everyone Claire was adopted for money, you should explain whose money it was. This is a family conflict story about adoption, financial betrayal, quiet revenge, and the night the people my parents called strangers stood up with records that changed the story I had been told about my life. Before I tell you why my birth family was there, I need to explain how the Mercers made gratitude feel like a debt I could never finish paying. Before I take you back, I want to speak to the person who has had a private part of their history used against them in a public room. Adoption, grief, poverty, illness, loss, or any beginning you did not choose should never become a tool someone uses to control you. You do not have to argue before you have the facts. You do not have to make your pain louder just because someone else made their story convenient. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is pause, keep the paper, and ask who benefited from everyone else not looking too closely. If this calm drama story feels familiar, write the word truth in the comments. And if you enjoy family conflict stories about quiet strength, family betrayal, boundaries, and the proof that arrives after years of being dismissed, subscribe for more. Now, let me take you back to the house where I learned the difference between being loved, being needed, and being told I should confuse the two. I was 7 when I moved into the Mercer house. It sat on a street called South Willow, 3 blocks from the library, and across from a small church with white columns and a parking lot that smelled like wet leaves whenever it rained. The house had a formal living room no one used, a kitchen with pale cabinets, and a narrow hallway where family photographs were arranged in matching frames. At first there were no pictures of me. I did not understand the legal words adults used. I knew my mother, Leela Monroe, had died after a sudden illness. I knew my birth father had died years earlier in an accident at a utility site. I knew that after a time with temporary foster families, Richard and Naomi Mercer were going to be my parents. Everyone spoke gently around me, which made the silences feel louder. Naomi gave me a yellow quilt and told me I could choose a color for my bedroom. Richard bought me a new backpack with reflective strips. Gavin, who was 9, showed me where the cereal was kept, and told me not to touch the shelf with his video games. For a while, those small things felt like safety. I do not want to pretend they did not matter. They did, but safety slowly came with a script. Every time a teacher complimented my grades, Naomi would say, "We worked so hard to get her caught up." Every time I hesitated before calling Richard Dad, he would remind me that names were a privilege and that most children would be grateful for a home like ours. The message was never that I belonged. The message was that I had been allowed in. By middle school, I knew that the Mercers had received adoption assistance after I was placed with them. I did not know the amount or how it worked. I only knew that once a year, forms arrived in a brown envelope, and Richard would tell me to sign the line that said I was still living in the home. He called it paperwork. Naomi called it routine. Neither of them explained that my birth, Father's Union survivor benefit, had also been deposited into an account in my name after I was adopted. I became a person who noticed paperwork because paperwork was the only place adults seemed to say exactly what they meant. I read school permission slips. I read medical forms. I read bills when I was old enough to understand the red print. When I was 17, I asked Richard why my last name on a pediatric record included Monroe in parentheses. He closed the file, looked at Naomi, and said, "Some things are better left in the past." That was how my history became a locked door inside the house where I lived. I grew up quiet, not because I had nothing to say, but because every question seemed to make someone tired. Gavin, on the other hand, was allowed to be curious out loud. He asked Richard about sales, delivery routes, warehouse leases, and profit margins. Richard answered him with pride. At dinner, they talked about Mercer Office Supply as though the company were another family member, demanding. Temperamental but disloyal, praised for busy. I was praised for not adding trouble. I was praised for making Naomi S.C. life calmer. By the time I left for college, I thought being useful was the same thing as being secure. I studied human resources and payroll administration because I liked systems that could protect people when someone more powerful wanted to rewrite the story. I worked evenings, saved every receipt, and built a life that did not depend on Richard's approval. That independence was the first thing he treated like betrayal. There was another reason I chose compliance: work. When I was in college, I worked to summers at a grocery store with a manager who liked to change people's hours after the fact. Older cashiers would come to the break room with pay stubs in their hands and whisper that the numbers felt wrong, but no one knew how to challenge them without risking a shift cut. I started comparing schedules, time cards, and payroll reports for friends. I was not trying to be heroic. I simply understood what it felt like when the person holding the records also controlled the story. At the healthcare network, I learned that every system has a hidden hierarchy. There are people who make decisions, people who follow them, and people who quietly clean up the consequences. I became good at noticing when a label did not match a payment, when a job classification did not fit the actual work, and when someone used vague language because precision would make responsibility visible. That skill made me valuable at work. At home, it made me inconvenient. Richard never asked how I had become good at my job. He preferred the version where I had drifted into an office and become unnecessarily attached to rules. But the truth was that I had built a career out of protecting people from the same kind of confusion I grew up with. I knew that a record was not cold. Sometimes a record was the only witness who stayed in the room after everyone else decided they were tired of hearing you. Mercer Office Supply was not a glamorous company, but it had been good to my parents for a long time. They sold desks, storage systems, printer supplies, and basic office furniture to small companies, clinics, and local schools. Richard ran the sales floor. Naomi controlled invoices and payroll. Gavin, after college, became the person my father took to client lunches and supplier meetings. I worked somewhere else. I was a payroll compliance specialist for a regional healthcare network. My job involved wage audits, benefit reconciliations, employee classifications, and the kind of quiet investigation that prevents one bad mistake from becoming 100 people's problem. I liked the work because it mattered even when no one applauded it. A late payment could hurt a family. A misclassified employee could lose benefits. A missing record could become an excuse for someone not to be treated fairly. Richard called it office policing. At holidays, he introduced Gavin as the one keeping the company alive and introduced me as Claire. She works with forms. If I corrected him, he would laugh and say I was too serious. If I did not correct him, the room moved on as though the description were complete. For years, I still helped with the family business. Naomi would send me a spreadsheet after dinner and ask whether I could look at it because I was better with details. Gavin would call when a vendor statement did not match a purchase order. Richard would complain about a late notice and then ask if I knew anyone who could explain it. I helped because I cared about Naomi, because Gavin sometimes sounded scared, and because I had been trained to believe that saying no to family was the same thing as abandoning them. The more I helped, the less anyone called it help. At one point, I discovered that the company had been paying certain personal expenses through a business account. Nothing dramatic at first. Restaurant charges coded as client entertainment. A cell phone bill labeled operations. A medical payment marked administrative services. I pointed it out to Naomi privately. She told me Richard did not like being questioned and that the company had survived worse. "Just let us get through this quarter," she said. That sentence became the family's favorite way to postpone honesty. Gavin benefited from the same pattern that had shaped my childhood. When he made a risky decision, Richard called it ambition. When I raised a concern, Richard called it negativity. Gavin leased a delivery van the company did not need because a supplier offered a discount. When the payments strained cash flow, Richard praised him for thinking ahead. One suggested we compare the lease terms to the actual delivery volume. And Dad sighed, "Not everything needs a committee." The company began to wobble after a major client closed to locations. It did not collapse overnight. Businesses rarely do. They become thinner first. Orders become smaller. Vendors call more often. The owner begins moving dates around on a calendar and pretending that delayed is the same as solved. Naomi started asking me to review monthly statements. I noticed two things immediately. The company had a larger tax liability than Richard admitted, and several deposits, labeled family support transfer, had moved through a legacy account connected to my name. When I asked where that money came from, Naomi went still. "It is old history," she said. I asked again. She said, "Do not make this personal, Claire," but it was personal. My name was on the account. I did not know it yet. But the Mercers had spent years treating funds connected to my childhood as an emergency reservoir for the business. They had borrowed from the story of my adoption, then expected me to protect them from the cost of telling the truth. The first time Richard used my adoption to make me feel small, I was 12. Our class had a family history project. We were supposed to bring in a photograph, write a page about a person who shaped us, and create a small timeline. I chose my mother because I had one photograph of her holding me on a bench outside a hospital. I did not remember the day the photo was taken, but I liked the way she was looking at me. She was not smiling for the camera. She was looking down at me, as though nothing else in the frame mattered. I wanted to ask Richard and Naomi what she had been like. I asked at dinner. Richard put down his fork and said, "You have a family now. Do not start romanticizing people who left you with a mess." Naomi whispered his name, but she did not correct him. I went to my room and threw the assignment under the bed. The next morning, Naomi found it. She sat beside me and said my father had been stressed. Then she told me I could write about Richard instead. I did not want to write about Richard. I wanted to be allowed to remember a woman who had died. At school, I told my teacher I had forgotten the photograph. I completed the project about the town library. I earned a good grade because I was good at following instructions when I knew the truth would not be welcome. That moment taught me something I carried for years. In the Mercer house, love came with conditions. I could be part of the family as long as I did not ask where I had come from, what money had followed me, or why certain questions made Richard angry. There were brighter moments too. Naomi took me shopping for prom. Gavin taught me how to drive in an empty parking lot. Richard paid for a used laptop when I started college. I held those moments tightly because I needed them to prove that my feelings were complicated. I did love them. That was the part no one understood later, when they asked why I had tolerated so much. Love is not always enough to make a home safe for the truth. When I was 19, I found a bank statement in a box of old school papers while helping Naomi clean the office. Our title was Claire Mercer befixed Oyocha balance, much lower than expected. I had been working long enough to know that a survivor benefit paid over years should leave a trail. I asked Naomi whether the account was mine. She looked frightened, which was unusual for her. "Your father handled that," she said. "Handled what?" "The money that came with your placement. It helped all of us when times were hard." I remember standing in the storage room with a roll of labels in my hand, trying to understand why she called it money that came with me. I was not a car with a rebate. I was a child who had lost both parents. Richard found us before Naomi could say more. He took the statement from my hand and told me I had no idea how expensive it had been to raise me. "We fed you, clothed you, paid for school supplies," he said. "Do you think that all fell from the sky?" I asked whether the account was for me. He said, "Everything we did was for you." That answer was designed to end the conversation without answering it. From then on, whenever I hesitated to help the business, Richard reminded me that I owed my life to the family. He never said it in exactly those words. He did not have to. The message lived under every request. Review this invoice. Lend us the money. Cover this payment. Keep quiet at dinner. Do not embarrass us. Do not ask why the numbers do not match. By the time I was 35, I understood that gratitude had become the most expensive bill I had ever been asked to pay. The letter that changed everything arrived on a Tuesday morning at my office. It was not dramatic. It came in a plain envelope from the State Office of Child and Family Services, addressed to Claire Mercer. I almost put it in the pile with insurance, notices, and nonprofit flyers. The only reason I opened it was because the name Monroe appeared before Mercer, and that almost never happened. The letter explained that a periodic review had been initiated for legacy adoption assistance. Cases connected to a state modernization project. It did not accuse anyone of wrongdoing. It said the agency was reconciling old custodial files with adult beneficiaries and requested updated contact information for people who had reached adulthood years earlier. Attached to the letter was a list of historical disbursements. I read it twice before I could breathe normally. There were adoption assistance payments, Yes, they were modest. They had helped support my care while I was a minor. But there was also a separate survivor benefit from my birth, father's union pension, fund, and a county-managed education account established after my mother died. Those funds had been listed as restricted resources for my care and education. Richard and Naomi had been designated custodians during my childhood. The total amount was not enough to make anyone rich, but it was enough to matter, enough to pay for tuition, enough to build an emergency fund, enough to explain why Richard had been so determined that I never ask questions. I called the number on the letter during my lunch break. The case reviewer, a woman named Helen Cho, spoke carefully. She said the agency could not discuss every detail over the phone, but she confirmed that my file contained several notes about annual accounting reports that had never been submitted after I turned 18. I asked whether my parents had been required to submit them. Yes, she said. The documents show custodial responsibility. We are trying to resolve incomplete records, not make assumptions. You have the right to request a full copy of your adult adoption and benefit file. That word, right, stayed with me. For most of my life, I had approached my past as if I needed permission to see it. Helen spoke as though the information belonged to me, because it did. A week later, I went to the records office. I sat at a table under fluorescent lights, while a clerk brought out a redacted binder and sealed envelopes. There were copies of my placement order, a court-approved adoption plan, benefit statements, correspondence between Richard and our county administrator, and a series of annual reports filled with handwriting I recognized. One report claimed that my survivor benefit had been used for tutoring, therapy, medical care, and educational expenses. Some of those things were real. I had gone to therapy for a short time. I had received tutoring in middle school. But several expenses appeared twice, once in the family business ledger and once in the custodial account records. The same invoice number for a computer purchase appeared in both places. A warehouse insurance charge was coded as family support. A business line of credit payment had been described as emergency educational housing expense. I did not call my parents. I did not confront Naomi. I took copies of every document, placed them in a folder, and scheduled a meeting with a lawyer who specialized in adult beneficiary accounting and adoption-related financial records. Her name was Dana Ruiz. The first thing she said after reading the file was, "We are going to separate what you know from what you can prove." I trusted her immediately. Dana explained that adoption assistance itself was not shameful and was not evidence that my parents had adopted me for money. It was support intended to help meet a child's needs. The problem was that the restricted survivor benefit and education account may have been used for unrelated business obligations, then described as my care. The records needed review. The story needed facts. For the first time, I understood that the truth could be both tender and precise. Dana asked me to make a personal timeline before we met again. She did not want feelings instead of evidence. She wanted the feelings placed beside dates so we could see where the gaps were. I wrote down every school year, every move, every job I had held, every time Richard had asked me to sign a form, and every moment I remembered seeing a brown envelope from the agency. The exercise was exhausting. It made me realize how many years I had spent treating uncertainty as a normal feature of my life. There were entries that looked small on paper. Age 14. Richard says benefits of family money. Age 18. Asked about account. Conversation ends. Age 22. Name appears in old loan file. Each line held a scene I could still feel in my body. Dana did not tell me that every hurt would become a legal claim. She told me something more useful. A pattern can be emotionally true before every part of it is legally proven. The work was to identify where the two overlapped. When I left her office that afternoon, I sat in my car with the timeline on the passenger seat. I did not feel powerful. I felt tired. But I also felt less alone. My questions had not appeared suddenly because I was angry. They had been waiting for years, written into the margins of my own life. 3 weeks after I met Dana, Richard invited me to the company's 35th anniversary dinner. He called it a celebration. He said clients, vendors, family friends, and former employees would be there. Naomi added that it would mean a lot to them if I came because the business had survived a difficult year and Richard wanted the family together. I almost said no. Then Naomi mentioned that Richard had one final document he hoped I would sign. She said it involved refinancing a loan that would lower the company's monthly payments and give everyone room to breathe. I asked whether my name was on the current debt. There was a pause. "Not exactly," she said. That was not an answer. Dana reviewed the proposed refinance agreement before I agreed to attend. The document was a personal guarantee. If Mercer office supply failed, the lender could pursue me for the balance. Richard had listed me as a family stakeholder because a legacy custodial account in my name had once been used as collateral language in a prior business filing. The bank wanted a clean release before it approved the new loan. I felt cold reading that. My parents had not simply borrowed from the money attached to my childhood. They had allowed my name to sit near their business debts for years, assuming I would cooperate because they had raised me. Dana told me I had no obligation to sign. She also told me that if I chose to attend the dinner, I should not discuss the investigation until we had more records. "Let them show you what they think they can get away with," she said. "You do not owe anyone a reaction on their preferred timeline." I called the state registry that same week. The adoption file included a voluntary contact form submitted years earlier by my birth aunt, Elena Monroe. She had asked to be contacted if I ever wanted information about my mother or her side of the family. The agency could not force a connection, but now that I was an adult, it could share the form. I stared at the page for a long time. Elena had written only 3 sentences. "I am Leela's sister. I have thought about Claire every day. I will respect any boundary she needs. I want her to know she was loved before she was ever placed somewhere else." It was not a demand. It was not a claim. It was an open door. I called the number. Elena answered on the 3rd ring. When I said my name, she became quiet. Then she sighed. "I have been hoping you would call. But I never wanted to make you feel responsible for my hope." We met the following Sunday at a cafe halfway between our towns. She brought a photograph album but did not open it until I asked. She told me about my mother's stubborn laugh, her work at a community health clinic, and the months after she died when the Monroe family tried to stay informed about my placement. She did not say Richard and Naomi were monsters. She said they had told the court they wanted a clean transition and that contact would confuse me. Elena had respected that, even when it hurt. When I told her about the anniversary dinner and the refinance papers, she did not ask to come. She asked if I had a lawyer. When I said I did, she said she and my grandmother had records too, letters, benefit statements from my birth father's union, and cancelled checks sent for my care before the adoption was finalized. The people I had been told were absent had kept proof that they were not. I invited them to the dinner only after Dana said it would be lawful and appropriate for them to attend as my guests. I did not invite them for a dramatic entrance. I invited them because I was tired of walking into rooms alone when the truth had witnesses. The anniversary dinner was held at the Lakeside Conference Center, a place Richard had chosen because its ballroom made everything look more successful than it was. The tables were covered in white cloth. The company logo rotated slowly on a projector screen. A cash bar stood beside framed photographs of old delivery trucks and ribbon-cutting ceremonies. I arrived early with Elena, my birth grandmother Ruth Monroe, and my cousins Theo and April. I introduced them simply as family. Naomi looked startled, then worried. Richard barely looked at them before turning back to greet a vendor. For the first hour, the evening was almost pleasant. People told stories about the company's early years. Gavin gave a short speech about loyalty. Richard thanked employees for staying through challenging seasons. Every time someone said family business, I felt the word shift in my chest. After dinner, Richard took the microphone. He spoke about sacrifice. He talked about long nights, risk, and the people who had believed in Mercer Office Supply when no one else did. Then he looked at me. Some of us were brought into this family when life gave us an unexpected opportunity, he said. We gave Claire a home when she had nowhere else to go. We did it when the assistants made it possible, and we have never asked for anything in return except loyalty. The room became quiet in the way rooms do when people sense a private conflict entering a public space. Richard lifted the Refinance packet. Tonight, I hope Claire will show that loyalty by helping us put the company on solid ground. It is a simple signature, a family signature. My hands were steady, which surprised me. I had imagined this moment in every possible way. I had imagined crying. I had imagined standing up and listing every document in my folder. I had imagined shouting that I was not a line item on a budget. Instead, I said, I will not sign a personal guarantee for a debt I did not create. Richard smiled tightly. Claire has always been cautious, I said. Cautious is what people call you when they want you to ignore the numbers. A few guests looked down. Someone near the front shifted a chair. Richard's face changed. We adopted you for money, Claire. Let us not pretend you were ever in a position to lecture us about sacrifice. He said it louder than before. He wanted the sentence to become the thing everyone remembered. Naomi whispered, Richard, stop. But he kept going. He said the state payments had kept the household afloat after a downturn. He said I had benefited from their generosity. He said I had no right to suddenly act like a victim when the company needed one favor. I looked at my mother. For years, I had waited for her to correct him. That night she looked tired, ashamed, and silent. Then Elena stood. She did not storm toward the microphone. She placed a hand on Ruth's shoulder, then faced Richard across the room. Claire was not adopted for money, she said. She was a child who lost her parents. The money you are talking about included survivor benefits from her father and support intended for her care. Her birth family contributed too. We have records. Ruth stood beside her. She was small and dressed in blue, but her voice was clear. We did not leave Claire, she said. We were told we were not allowed to confuse her. We trusted that you would use the money for her future. We trusted you because she was 7. The room did not erupt. No one clapped. That is not what real humiliation looks like. Real humiliation is quieter. It is when the story you used for years stops working because people can see the missing pages. Richard lowered the microphone. I did not say another word. I picked up the Refinance packet, placed it in my bag, and walked out with the people who had stood up when I could not carry the whole truth alone. In the parking lot, Naomi followed me. She was crying before she reached us. For a moment, I wanted to comfort her. I had spent so many years reading the smallest changes in her face and adjusting myself around them. I knew how to make room for her shame. I knew how to tell her that Richard was stressed, that people said foolish things at events, that family should handle problems privately. But I was tired of private problems that only became private when they hurt me. Naomi said, "Your father should not have said that." I asked, "Was it true?" She looked at the pavement. "The business was in trouble when you came to us," she said. "The assistance helped. The benefit checks helped. We thought we would replace them. You thought you would replace my childhood." She looked up then, and I saw that she understood what I meant. I told her I loved the parts of our life that had been real. I told her I would not pretend those parts erase the harm. I told her I would not sign the guarantee, and I would not discuss the audit with Richard without counsel present. She called it cruel. I said, "No, it is a boundary." The next morning, I emailed Richard and Naomi a short message. I told them all financial communication would go through Dana. I told them not to use my name in company filings, loan applications, or discussions with the lender without my written consent. I told them I would cooperate with any lawful review of the custodial accounts. Richard replied within minutes. His message said I was trying to destroy the business that had raised me. He said Elena had points the people wife. Once sent Dana did reply. That was harder than it sounds. Silence can feel like surrender when you have been raised to defend yourself. But this silence was different. It was not obedience. It was control over where my energy went. Elena and Ruth did not push me toward any decision. They did not call themselves my real family in front of me. They used the words I chose: birth family, relatives, people who wanted to know me. Elena told me adoption did not erase the love I had received or the complicated memories I carried. It only meant I deserved a complete story. That distinction mattered more than I knew how to say. Over the next month, Dana requested records from the state agency, the Union Pension Administrator, the County Education Account, and Mercer Office Supply. The company's lender sent a notice that the refinance application was suspended pending clarification of the guarantee and legacy collateral references. Richard called every day for a week. Then Gavin called. He said he had not known the details. He said Dad was scared. He said everyone was suffering because I had made things legal. I told him the records had always been legal. We had simply stopped pretending they were family secrets. Gavin was quiet for a long time. Then he asked if I really believed our parents used the money that came with me. I said, I do not need to believe it. We are going to read the records. Dana built the investigation the way I built payroll audits at work, slowly, in categories, with no room for guesses. The first category was money intended for my care. The state agency records showed adoption assistance payments. Those payments had been legal and were not, by themselves, evidence of wrongdoing. Dana explained this more than once, because she did not want anyone using the audit to turn adoption assistance into something shameful. Support for a child is support for a child. The issue was whether custodians used restricted funds honestly and whether they reported the use of those funds correctly. The second category was the survivor benefit from my birth father's union. Those payments were made because he had died while I was a minor. The documents stated that the money was to be held for my care, education, health, and future needs. Richard and Naomi had been authorized to manage it. They were required to keep accounts. The third category was the county education fund opened after my mother died. It was small compared with the survivor benefit, but it mattered because it showed a pattern. The fund was intended for school expenses and post-secondary education. By the time I started college, most of it was gone. Mercer office supplies ledgers told the rest of the story. There were payments from the custodial account to vendors who had never provided services to me. There were transfers labeled household stabilization that corresponded with company payroll shortages. There were handwritten notes from Richard that said replace after summer orders and bridge until vendor payment clears. Some funds had been used for real family expenses, but the records did not separate my needs from business needs. The money had become a drawer Richard opened whenever the company could not cover its own obligations. Dana also found a 2012 filing where my name appeared as a contingent interest holder in a loan renewal. I was 22 at the time. I had never signed it. The signature line was blank, but a supporting attachment listed the custodial benefit account among family-affiliated assets. That was why the bank wanted my guarantee now. The lender wanted to clean up a history built on assumptions about my cooperation. The more evidence we found, the less dramatic I felt. I expected anger. Instead, I felt a kind of grief that had nowhere to go. Every dollar was a small decision. Every false label required someone to choose convenience over honesty. Every time Naomi told me not to make it personal, she was asking me to ignore the fact that it had always been personal. One afternoon, Ruth brought me a cardboard box from her closet. Inside were copies of checks she and her late husband had sent to Richard and Naomi during my first years with them. The memo lines said for Claire's school clothes, for Claire's dental work, for Claire's savings. There were letters too. One from Naomi thanked Ruth for the help and promised that she and Richard would keep the funds separate. Ruth held that letter like it weighed more than paper. "I did not keep these because I expected a fight," she said. "I kept them because I wanted to remember that we tried to help." That sentence broke something open in me. My birth family had not forgotten me. They had been told distance was best. Then they had continued to send support anyway. They had respected a boundary that Richard and Naomi later used as proof of abandonment. Dana arranged a formal accounting conference with the state reviewer, the union administrator, Richard and Naomi's attorney, and my counsel. She said the goal was not revenge. The goal was disclosure, accounting, and a lawful resolution. I believed her. But I also knew that when people have used a lie for years, the truth can feel like a consequence, even when no one raises their voice. The investigation changed my routine in small ways. I stopped answering unknown calls after work. I created a folder for every email. I made notes after conversations, including the date, the subject, and the exact words that seemed designed to make me doubt myself. I did this because Dana asked me to, but I also did it because the process gave shape to a fear that had always been shapeless. At the same time, I tried not to let the audit become the only thing in my life. I went to the grocery store. I took walks after dinner. I met Elena for coffee and learned ordinary facts about my mother that had nothing to do with money, that she kept peppermints in her purse, that she loved thunder but hated wind, that she could never remember where she put her keys. Those details mattered because they returned my mother to me as a person instead of a missing file. One evening, Elena asked whether I regretted opening the records. I thought about Richard's face at the dinner, the call from Helen Cho, the ledger entries, and the old photograph on my kitchen table. Then I said no. I regretted that the truth had been hidden. I did not regret learning how to live without hiding from it. The weeks before the accounting conference were the loneliest part of the story. Richard called relatives before I could speak to them. He told them I had been manipulated by strangers. He said I was trying to punish the parents who had rescued me. Some people believed him because they had only ever heard his version of the adoption. Others said nothing because they did not know what to say. My cousin Madison sent me a message that began, "I do not want to get involved," then continued for 3 paragraphs explaining why I should forgive my parents. An old neighbor wrote that families should not sue family. A former employee from the company called to say Richard had been telling staff the audit was a misunderstanding caused by my emotional instability. The words hurt because they were familiar. Whenever I had asked a difficult question, someone had suggested I was too sensitive. Whenever I had set a limit, someone had called it aggression. People did not need to know the details of the records to recognize the old family pattern. They only needed to choose whether they wanted to see it. Gavin surprised me. He asked to meet at a diner outside town. He looked tired in a way I had never seen before. He told me he had found a file cabinet key in Richard's desk and had reviewed old company folders. He had seen some of the same transfers Dana had found. "I thought Dad was borrowing from savings," he said. "I did not know it was your account." I asked whether he had ever wondered why Richard became angry whenever I asked about money. Gavin looked down. "I thought he was angry because you were questioning him. In our house, that was the same thing as being disloyal. It was close to an apology. I told him I did not need him to choose sides. I needed him not to lie, for our parents." He nodded. Naomi called me the night before the conference. Her voice was so quiet, I almost did not recognize it. "I want to tell them I knew," she said. I waited. I knew enough. She continued. "I knew Richard moved money. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself we were using it to keep the roof over your head. But then the business became the roof over everyone's head, and I stopped asking where the money came from. I wanted to ask why she had never protected me. I wanted to ask why. At the dinner, she had waited until Elena spoke before she looked ashamed. Instead, I said, "Then tell the truth tomorrow." She began to cry. I did not rescue her from it. That was another boundary I had to learn. An apology is not complete because someone feels bad. It becomes meaningful when they stop asking the person they hurt to make them feel better. I slept badly that night. I made coffee before sunrise, opened my folder, and looked at the photograph of my mother holding me outside the hospital. For the first time, I did not feel like I was betraying the Mercers by wanting to know her. I felt like I was finally allowing myself to be whole. The accounting conference took place in a Plain County meeting room with a long table, a wall clock, and a tray of stale coffee. It was not cinematic. There were no dramatic lights, no packed courtroom, no audience waiting to clap. There were folders, laptop chargers, legal pads, and the quiet sound of people opening documents they did not want to read. Helen Cho sat beside the agency file. A representative from the Union Pension Fund joined by video. Dana sat on my right. Richard and Naomi sat across from me with their attorney. Gavin sat at the end of the table. Elena, Ruth, Theo, and April were behind me in the observer chairs. The meeting began with Helen explaining the purpose of the review. She said the agency was not there to judge anyone's feelings about adoption. It was there to determine whether restricted funds had been used and reported according to the law. I was grateful she said that. My adoption was not the crime. The way my history had been used was the problem. Dana presented the records in order. She showed the survivor benefit deposits, the county education fund, the annual reports, and the business ledger entries that matched transfers out of the custodial account. She showed the lender documents, referencing family-affiliated assets. She showed the missing accountings after I turned 18. Richard's attorney tried to frame the payments as household expenses. Dana asked for invoices. He said some records had been lost. Dana placed a copy of Naomi's 2004 letter on the table. It promised Ruth that the funds sent for my school clothes, dental work, and savings would be kept separately. Then she placed an internal company ledger beside it. The same month Ruth sent money for my school clothes. Mercer Office Supply paid a late vendor balance, using a transfer from the custodial account. The room went still. Richard said, "We raised her. We did what we had to do." Helen looked at him. Raising a child does not give a custodian permission to use restricted benefit funds for unrelated company debt. He looked at me then, not at the documents. "You would not have had a home without us. For years." That sentence would have crushed me, but Ruth stood before I could answer. She was 81 by then and used a cane. She did not walk quickly, but she walked to the table and placed both hands on the back of an empty chair. "My daughter did not abandon Claire," she said. "Leela died. Claire's father had already died. We were told a stable adoption would give her the best chance. We believed the Mercers wanted to love her. We never asked for money back. We never asked to control her life. We asked for photographs. We asked if she was healthy. We sent what we could for her future." Her voice shook once, then steadied. "When we were told not to contact her, we respected it because we did not want to make her life harder. But do not stand in front of my granddaughter and say she was adopted for money as if she were a transaction. She was a child, and she was loved." Elena stood beside her. "We are not here to take her from anyone," she said. "Claire gets to decide who is family to her. We are here because the story Richard told erased the people who loved her before and after the adoption. We are here because the money was meant to protect her, not become a business bridge." I watched Richard's face while they spoke. For the first time, he had no room to turn the issue into my ingratitude. The people behind me were not asking him for approval. They were not performing pain. They were reading the truth into a room where he had controlled the story for too long. Naomi began to cry. Then, quietly, she told the conference that she had known Richard use the funds during difficult periods in the business. She said she had signed reports without checking every line. She said she had been afraid of losing the company, then afraid of what would happen if the company's debts became visible. Helen documented her statement. The union representative explained that the survivor benefit would need a formal accounting and that any verified misuse could require restitution. The county education fund administrator stated that the remaining records would be reviewed separately. The lender's representative, who had joined for the collateral question, said the bank would remove my name from any future discussion and reassess the company's application without my guarantee. No one shouted. That was the strange thing. The truth did not need a scene because the documents had already done the work. At the end of the meeting, Dana asked me whether I wanted to say anything for the record. I looked at Richard and Naomi. "I will not let adoption be used as a debt," I said. "I will not let my birth family be described as people who left when the records show they tried to protect me. And I will not sign away my future to keep a business afloat because you taught me to confuse silence with loyalty." Then I closed my folder. That was the moment my real family stood up, not because biology made them more real than anyone else, but because they chose truth when it cost them nothing to stay quiet. The legal resolution took months. There was no single day when everything became fair. The state agency completed its review. The Union Pension Fund calculated a restitution amount based on verified transfers and missing accounting records. Richard and Naomi agreed, through their attorney, to repay a portion immediately and to enter a structured repayment plan for the rest. The County Education Fund was reopened for review, and a remaining balance was transferred to an account in my name after fees and adjustments. Mercer Office Supply did not receive the refinancing it wanted. The company sold part of its warehouse inventory, closed the smaller showroom, and moved into a cheaper space. Richard blamed me at first. He told anyone who would listen that I had destroyed the business. But a business is not destroyed by the person who stops hiding its debts. It is damaged by the debts themselves and by the choices that made them invisible. Gavin stayed with the company for a while, then left to work for a supplier in another city. Before he moved, he came to my apartment with a box of files that belonged to me, school records, old letters, a copy of my original placement order, and the photograph album Naomi had kept in the attic. I found them when we were clearing out the office, he said. I thought you should have them. I asked him why he had not given them to me years earlier. He looked embarrassed. I did not know Dad had them. That was the problem with family systems, built on one person's version of the truth. Everyone else learns not to ask what is behind the locked door. Naomi wrote me a letter. It was not perfect. It did not erase the years. But it was the first time she used direct language. She wrote that she had loved me and still loved me, but that love did not excuse the fear that kept her silent. She wrote that I had never owed them for becoming their daughter. She wrote that she understood if I needed distance. I did need distance. I did not cut her off forever. I did not punish her by withholding forgiveness as a performance. I told her we could speak once a month, with no discussion of money, the business, or my birth family unless I chose it. I told her a relationship would require honesty, not apologies delivered only when someone else was watching. Richard did not accept the boundary easily. He sent messages accusing me of rewriting history. I did not respond. I had spent enough of my life trying to convince him that facts mattered. My relationship with Elena and Ruth developed slowly. We had breakfast. We looked through photographs. I learned that my mother loved crossword puzzles and hated driving on highways. I learned that my birth father had fixed old radios and always sang the wrong lyrics to songs. I learned that there were people who had remembered my birthday, even when they were not allowed to call. None of that erased the Mercers. It did not have to. My life was not a choice between one family and another. It was a decision to stop letting one person decide which parts of me were allowed to exist. The money from the restored accounts did not make me rich. I used part of it to finish paying my student loans. I put some into savings. With the rest, I funded a small scholarship through the community college for adult adoptees and former foster youth who needed help paying for certifications or training. I named it the Leela Monroe Education Grant. When I signed the paperwork, I felt something settle inside me. The money had been used to make me feel purchased. Now, it was being used to help someone build a future no one could use against them. The most surprising consequence was not the repayment plan or the lender's decision. It was the way other relatives began changing the language they used around me. An aunt who had once called me the lucky one sent a message saying she was sorry. A former teacher wrote that she remembered how carefully I had guarded questions about my family. Even people who did not know how to apologize directly stopped repeating Richard's version of the story. That did not restore the years I had lost, but it mattered. Families are often held together by phrases everyone repeats, because no one wants to be the first person to challenge them. When one phrase breaks, people are forced to decide whether they will replace it with another lie or with something more honest. I chose honesty, even when it was less tidy. I told people that the Mercers had raised me and also hurt me. I said my birth family was part of my life and did not erase the past. I said I was learning to build relationships around accountability instead of obligation. The people who could hear that stayed. The people who needed a simpler story drifted away. A year after the accounting conference, I attended a small family dinner at Eleanor's house. Ruth made soup. Theo brought bread from a bakery near his apartment. April showed me pictures of her new puppy. No one asked me to prove I belonged. No one made a speech about how lucky I was. There were too many dishes on the table and not enough chairs, which is how I had always imagined family should feel. At one point, Elena asked whether I wanted to add a photo of my mother to the hallway wall. She did not assume. She asked. I said yes. That was the difference between being claimed and being welcomed. My parents announced that I was adopted for money because they believed the sentence would make everyone see me as a debt. They believed it would make my refusal to sign look selfish. They believed the story of my beginning belonged to them because they had repeated it for so long. They were wrong. The people who stood up that night did not stand up to replace one family with another. They stood up to tell the truth. A child is never a business investment. Adoption assistance is never a reason to shame someone. And gratitude is not a contract that allows people to take your future. Quiet revenge was not humiliating my parents in return. It was refusing to carry the lie for them. It was reading the records, setting a boundary, and allowing the truth to be heard by people who were ready to listen. If you have ever been told that you owe someone for surviving, remember this: support that comes with control is not the same as love. You are allowed to ask questions about your own life. You are allowed to honor every part of your history. And you are allowed to choose people who stand up for you without asking you to become smaller first. Have you ever watched someone use family history, money, or a private truth to control another person? At what point do you think silence stops keeping the peace and starts protecting the wrong story? Share your opinion in the comments. And for more family conflict stories about calm strength, hard evidence, and the choices that chain, subscribe and stay with us.